My grandfather used to tell me that lighthouses were built to guide ships home, but not every light out there is trying to save you. Some are warning you to stay away. This story starts with a man named Oliver Crane. I met him in 2019 while working a contract job for coastal restoration off the coast of Washington. He'd been retired from the Coast Guard for over 15 years, but he still carried that look of someone who'd seen too much and slept too little. When I asked what the worst post he'd ever been stationed at was, he didn't hesitate. "The Ashcombe Light," he said, "and if you ever see it, don't stop to look." The Ashcombe Light was a small iron tower on a rocky island about 30 miles offshore, long decommissioned. According to Oliver, the station was officially removed from maps in the early 1980s, after multiple crewmen reported the same thing, voices in the fog. He'd been sent there in 1998 to re-establish the solar power array. It was a routine 3-day assignment. He went with a mechanic named Francis. The first 2 days were normal, boring, cold, damp. But on the third night, the beacon kept failing. The bulb would flicker, die, and then light itself again, even with the power switch off. Oliver said he went up to check the wiring, only to find the light chamber door hanging open, swaying slightly, even though the air was still. There were footprints inside, bare feet. They led to the glass and stopped right at the edge. When he called down to Francis, there was no reply. He went down and found the bunk room empty, the door wide open. The ladder that led to the rocks below was wet, like someone had just climbed it. He shouted Francis's name into the fog. Nothing but waves answered. He didn't sleep that night. Around 3 a.m., the radio on the table crackled to life. No voice, just breathing. Then a whisper. "Turn it off." He unplugged it, threw it across the room, and waited until morning. When the boat arrived, he didn't tell anyone what he'd seen. But when they searched later, they found Francis's body washed up 5 miles north, eyes open, hands covered in salt scars. His nails were packed with glass dust, the same type used in lighthouse lenses. Oliver quit the Coast Guard that same year. He said the light didn't guide anyone home that night. It brought something back. The second story was told to me by a man named Peter Hargrove. He wasn't military, just a historian who specialized in maritime architecture. He'd been contracted by the state of Maine to inspect a ruined tower known locally as Widow's Point. The name came from the old legend that a woman once waited there every night for her husband's ship to return until she finally threw herself into the Ave. Water. Peter didn't believe in that kind of thing. He told me he'd been to Widow's Point twice before in daylight, but the third time he stayed overnight. He wanted to capture ambient recordings of the waves hitting the foundation for an audio archive. He brought 2 mics, a camera, and a sleeping bag. He said the weirdness began just after midnight. The waves changed pitch, and not louder, not quieter, just different. Like the ocean itself was humming in tune with something. Then the recorder picked up a second voice, faint, almost under the waterline. When he played it back later, the words were clear enough to understand. "He's still here." When he shined his flashlight toward the surf, he swore he saw movement beneath the surface, long strands of hair floating upward, attached to nothing. He stumbled back into the tower and slammed the iron door. He said he heard someone whisper from the other side, "It's not time to go." Peter stayed awake until dawn, watching the first light creep through the cracks in the stone. When the fog lifted, there were handprints on the inside of the glass. Small ones, too small to be his. He packed his gear, left, and never returned. The audio file still exists. "I've heard it once. The voice isn't human. It sounds like it's speaking through water. Drawn out, gurgling, and wrong. The last story in this first part came from my cousin's friend, a man named Leon, who worked for the Marine Infrastructure Authority. He'd been tasked to shut down a signal relay that was still transmitting from a deactivated beacon on the Oregon coast. The signal kept looping a coded distress pattern that hadn't been used since the 1950s. He said the trip out was calm, blue sky, light waves. The tower stood on a narrow ridge, maybe 50 feet high, half of it crumbling from decades of salt exposure. The hatch at the base was rusted shut. He had to break it open with a crowbar. Inside, the place reeked of mold and oil. There was something unsettling about how dry the air was. No breeze, no dripping water, just stillness. The beacon room above was intact, but something was hanging from the ceiling, A series of ropes tied in knots, almost decorative. He said they looked like sailors' knots, but older. Each one had a small glass sphere attached, filled with cloudy liquid. When he cut one open, the smell that came out made him gag. A sharp, metallic odor, like blood and salt, mixed together. The floor below the lens was stained dark. He followed a narrow staircase downward, into a maintenance cellar that wasn't on the blueprint. The deeper he went, the colder it got. The walls were slick with condensation, and the air carried a faint hum. At the end of the hall, there was a steel door chained shut from the outside. The chain was new, polished, uncorroded. Someone had locked it recently. He leaned close, trying to hear what was behind it. He swore he heard a faint thumping, like the slow turn of machinery. Then 3 knocks. He climbed out and radioed his supervisor. But as he waited, the beacon above flickered on by itself, even though he disconnected the power. The light swept across the fog and then froze, pointing straight at him. He left his tools, his clipboard, everything, and sprinted back to the boat. He said that as the island faded behind him, the beam of the light followed the boat until it disappeared into the mist. When he got back to the dock, his supervisor asked if he'd triggered the emergency signal during his check-in. Leon said no. But the logs showed a transmission from his unit at 3:33 p.m. that read, "We are below." He still has nightmares about that day. He says sometimes he dreams of the beam still sweeping across his bedroom wall. Low rumble builds. Ocean wind returns. Every lighthouse has one thing in common, a light that turns over and over, cutting through the dark. But if you ever find yourself near one that's been dark for decades, and suddenly it starts turning again, don't assume it's a sign of safety. Sometimes the light isn't calling sailors home. Sometimes it's trying to remember who it lost. Soft static fades out. After hearing Leon's story, I couldn't stop thinking about those lights. The way a decommissioned beacon could suddenly turn on, pointing, watching. A few months later, I found myself with the chance to see one of these towers for myself. Not Ashcombe. Not Widow's Point. This was the Carter Rock Light, a long-abandoned lighthouse on the northern edge of Oregon's coast. It had been decommissioned in 1979, left to rot, and according to local records, no one had set foot there in over 20 years. I went with a colleague named Marissa, a field engineer who specialized in signal restoration. She didn't believe in hauntings, but she did respect old tech, especially the lighthouses. Our assignment was simple: check for structural integrity and retrieve the old logbooks stored in the keeper's room. Easy, safe work, or so I thought. We arrived mid-afternoon by a small inflatable boat, paddling through choppy waves toward the jagged rocks surrounding the island. Carter Rock was smaller than expected, just enough space for the lighthouse, a fuel shed, and a collapsed dock. Even in daylight, the place felt wrong. The air was heavy, damp, and smelled faintly of rust and seaweed. The tower itself was blackened from decades of salt exposure, and patches of orange corrosion crawled up the iron walls. The windows were all broken, the glass long gone, leaving jagged shards. The door at the base was rusted shut, so Marissa pried it open with a crowbar while I kept watch. Inside it was cold, too cold. Not a chill from the ocean wind, but something else, as if the walls themselves had absorbed decades of fog and darkness. We set down our gear and began climbing the spiral staircase, careful not to slip on the rusted metal. Each step creaked beneath our weight, echoing into the void above. The keeper's room was on the 3rd floor. When we got there, I noticed something odd. Footprints in the dust on the floor. Small barefoot prints. I froze. Marissa glanced over her shoulder and shrugged. "Probably the old janitor," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. The logbooks were still there, stacked neatly on a shelf. The first entries were routine: dates, weather, shipping notes. But as we flipped through, I noticed something chilling. Around 1965, the entries stopped being normal. The handwriting became shaky, irregular, almost frantic. Some pages were smeared with what looked like rust-colored stains. The last entries read, "The voices in the fog are calling. They know our names. We must stay in the light. I saw him in the rocks again. He watches, waits." "We are below." I looked at Marissa. She didn't speak, just turned pale. That night we decided to stay in the tower to finish cataloging the logs. We set up sleeping bags on the floor and left our flashlights on, casting long shadows across the walls. Around 2 a.m., the power generator we'd brought to recharge equipment cut off. Strange because it was running perfectly earlier. The tower plunged into near darkness, then the sound started. At first it was subtle, a low scraping coming from the stairwell above. I froze. Marissa whispered, "Did you leave anything upstairs?" Nothing. The sound grew louder. Not scraping, but footsteps. Slow, deliberate, descending. Bare feet on metal. 1, 2, 3, stopping right outside our room. I wanted to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. A shadow passed under the doorway. Nothing else. Just the silhouette of someone tall standing silently, I whispered to Marissa. She shook her head. The shadow didn't move again. Then faintly a voice, "Turn it back on." I scrambled to the generator, fumbling in the dark. The moment I managed to restart it, the tower lit up. Not just our lights, but the main beacon itself. The glass lens above rotated slowly, sweeping across the jagged cliffs and ocean beyond. The beam caught something. Just for a second. Someone, a figure standing at the cliff's edge, watching us. Wet hair clung to their face. No features, just shadow. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Marissa screamed and we bolted downstairs. The door at the base, which had been wedged open earlier, was now locked from the outside. No way anyone had done it. We pounded and shouted. Then the sound of water hitting metal, a scraping, dragging noise, echoed from outside around the rocks. We didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Marissa insisted we leave. I wanted to finish cataloguing the logs, but as we stepped onto the rocks, we noticed something impossible. Footprints leading to the cliff's edge. Not ours, bare, small, wet footprints. 10 or 12 stopping at the edge, looking as though someone had jumped. But there was no one there. The tide had not yet receded, and no boat had come close. Back in the tower, the main beam was off. But as I glanced toward the lens, I saw something chilling. The ropes with glass spheres similar to what Leon had described. One had fallen, cracked on the floor, liquid inside spreading across the rusted metal. I swore I saw movement inside the fluid, a hand forming, clawing, then dissolving. We left the island immediately, paddling back to the mainland in silence. Not a word. Every sound of the waves hitting the boat felt like footsteps behind us. Weeks later, I received an email from Leon. He'd gotten a new assignment, another abandoned lighthouse, this time in Alaska. He attached an audio clip. It was a transmission from Carter Rock Light. The voice wasn't human, a wet, gurgling tone, distorted. It repeated the same words over and over. "We are below. We are below. We are below." The chilling part, the timestamp. The transmission was recorded the night we visited. I've never gone back. And neither has Marissa. Some people might dismiss this as isolation, stress, or old machinery acting up. Maybe. But these lighthouses share something. They were never meant to be fully abandoned. Something lingers in the fog, in the glass, in the sound of water against stone. It waits, watches, and every time the beam rotates, it looks for someone. Someone to call back. Soft creaking ocean wind, and distant foghorn fades out. I've shared these stories because lighthouses fascinate people, a symbol of safety, yet often built in the most dangerous, isolated places imaginable. But the next time you see a lighthouse standing alone in fog or storm, remember this: some lights aren't guiding you home. They're keeping track of who's below,